I'm Samantha, 27 years old, and I spent my entire life trying to be the perfect daughter. Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect smile even when I was breaking inside. I never imagined that bringing news of my promotion to a family dinner would end with my father's cold eyes on me as he said, "Consider yourself a stranger to this family," before my mother asked me to leave. How does someone recover when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally decide you are no longer worthy of a place at their table? Before I tell you how my entire family turned against me, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And subscribe if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you love. I grew up in a brick colonial in suburban Boston, where success wasn't celebrated, it was expected. My parents, Margaret and Richard Wilson, ran our household like a corporation where achievements were the only currency that mattered. My father built his accounting firm from nothing, working 60-hour weeks and expecting nothing less than perfection from his family. My mother, equally ambitious, balanced her career as a real estate agent with maintaining our picture-perfect home where every surface gleamed and every family photo showed beaming smiles that rarely matched reality. Then there was my younger brother Thomas, Tommy to everyone but our father, who insisted formal names showed proper respect. Tommy was 3 years younger and somehow always managed to be the sun around which our family orbited. His baseball trophies commanded the central position on the mantle, while my academic awards were neatly tucked away in a drawer. Sports build character, my father would say. Anyone can study. From my earliest memories, I understood the unspoken contract of our family. Love was conditional, approval had to be earned, and someone was always keeping score. When I brought home my first report card with all A's in 4th grade, my mother glanced at it and said, "That's what we expect, Samantha." When Thomas brought home B's and a C, he received effusive praise for working through his challenges. The pattern continued through high school. I was captain of the debate team, editor of the yearbook, and graduated as valedictorian. At my graduation party, my father raised a toast to Samantha for meeting expectations. Later that same evening, he pulled Thomas aside to discuss his college plans. Despite Thomas being only a freshman, I overheard him say, "You've got real potential, son." When it came time for college, I was accepted to 7 prestigious universities. I wanted to study art history at NU. I'd always found peace in museums, losing myself in brushstrokes up in colors that spoke to something deep inside me. But my father scoffed. "Art won't pay the bills, Samantha. Be practical." I enrolled in Boston University's finance program instead, commuting from home to save money as my parents suggested. Meanwhile, Thomas attended Boston College on a partial baseball scholarship, living in the dorms with a generous monthly allowance. "He needs the full college experience," my mother explained when I questioned the disparity. "You've always been so independent, Samantha." I graduated summa cum laude, securing a position at Preston Financial Advisors, one of Boston's most respected firms. At my graduation dinner, my parents spent most of the evening discussing Thomas's sophomore year adventures and his summer internship that our father had arranged through a golf buddy. For 5 years, I worked tirelessly at Preston, building a client portfolio that executives twice my age would envy. I lived in a modest apartment, saved aggressively, and continued to seek the validation I'd never received. Sunday dinners at my parents' house became a predictable exercise in invisibility. I'd arrive with a nice bottle of wine and prepared anecdotes about work that would hopefully impress my father. "The market's volatile," he'd typically respond. "Don't get complacent." Thomas, now working at our father's firm on a fast track to partnership despite his mediocre performance in business school, would arrive late, empty-handed, and immediately command attention with stories that my parents found endlessly fascinating. "Thomas has such natural charisma with clients," my father would beam. "You can't teach that, Samantha. You've always been more technical." Last month, after years of 60-hour work weeks and sacrificed weekends, I was promoted to senior advisor, the youngest in the firm's history. My boss, Jeffrey Preston himself, cited my exceptional analytical skills and unwavering dedication. The promotion came with a substantial raise, an expanded office, and the opportunity to work with the firm's most valuable client. For the first time in years, I felt a flutter of hope. This achievement was undeniable, quantifiable, significant. Surely this would be enough to make my parents proud. I decided to announce it at our monthly family dinner, already imagining my father's approving nod, perhaps even a celebratory toast. The night before the dinner, I called my grandmother Eleanor, my father's mother and the only person who seemed to see me clearly. She lived in coastal Maine, too far to attend regular family gatherings, but we spoke weekly. "They'll be proud, sweetheart," she assured me, "and if they're not, remember that I am." I arrived at my parents' house that Sunday clutching an expensive bottle of champagne, wearing a new dress and rehearsing the casual way I would mention my promotion. For once I thought the spotlight might shine on me. The spring evening was perfect as I pulled into my parents' driveway, carefully parking my modest Honda behind my Aunt Patricia's Mercedes and my Uncle William's Boam. My cousin Emily's Audi was there too, along with her brother Jason's pickup truck. This wasn't our usual family dinner, this was a gathering. My stomach tightened as I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, applying a fresh coat of lipstick. Had I missed an occasion? Was it someone's birthday? I entered through the side door as always, the familiar scent of my mother's beef bourguignon filling the air. The sound of laughter spilled from the living room, genuine, unbridled laughter that rarely featured at our tense family meals. "Samantha's here," my mother announced as I walked in, her voice carrying a note of something I couldn't identify. She wore her entertaining outfit, tailored black pants, silk blouse, pearls that had been her mother's. Her smile seemed stretched too wide as she air-kissed my cheek. "You're right on time. Everyone else arrived early." My father stood by the fireplace, tumbler of scotch in hand, deep in conversation with Uncle William. He glanced up briefly. "Samantha, hang your coat in the closet, not on the chair." I obediently returned to the hallway to properly hang my coat, placing the champagne on the entry table. When I returned, Thomas was center stage, his arm around a slender blonde woman I'd never seen before. She was beautiful in an effortless way, wearing a simple blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Sam," Thomas called out, using the nickname my parents always corrected. "Come meet Heather." I crossed the room, summoning my professional smile. "Hi, I'm Samantha. Nice to meet you." "This is Heather Blackwell," Thomas announced, his chest puffing slightly. "Robert Blackwell's daughter." The name registered immediately. Robert Blackwell owned Blackwell Investments, one of the largest financial services companies in New England. My father had been trying to secure a business partnership with him for years. "Pleasure," Heather said, extending a manicured hand. A sizable diamond glittered on her ring finger, catching the light and everyone's attention. My mother materialized beside us, champagne flutes on a silver tray. "Let's move to the dining room, shall we? I think we're ready for the announcement." Announcement. I followed the group to the dining room, where the table was set with the good china and crystal reserved for major holidays and significant celebrations. Candles flickered in the centerpiece, and a bottle of Dom Perignon stood chilling in an ice bucket. My humble champagne contribution seemed pathetic in comparison. We took our usual seats, with my father at the head of the table, my mother to his right, and Thomas to his left. I sat beside my mother, with Heather next to Thomas. Aunt Patricia, Uncle William, and cousins Emily and Jason filled in the remaining seats. My father stood, raising his glass. "Before we begin, I'd like to propose a toast." His face softened in a way I rarely witnessed. "Today is a momentous occasion for our family. Thomas and Heather have announced their engagement." The table erupted in cheers and congratulations. My mother dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. "Robert and I couldn't be more pleased to join our families," my father continued, "not only personally, but professionally. As of yesterday, Blackwell Wilson Financial Partners is officially established." Another round of applause. Thomas beamed, accepting backslaps from Uncle William and raising his glass in acknowledgement. "To the future of our family, both personal and professional," my father concluded. "To Thomas and Heather," added my mother. I raised my glass mechanically, trying to process what was happening. Thomas engaged to Robert Blackwell's daughter, a business merger. No wonder my parents had gathered everyone. As dinner progressed, I sat quietly while conversation swirled around wedding plans and business prospects. Thomas detailed his promotion to junior partner in the newly formed company. Heather discussed potential venues and whether a Christmas wedding would be too cliché. "What do you think, Samantha?" Heather asked suddenly, jarring me from my thoughts. "You've been so quiet. Thomas says you work in finance too." "Yes," I said, seizing the opening. "Actually, I have some news as well. I was promoted to senior advisor at Preston last week. I'm the youngest in the firm's history." A brief silence fell over the table. "Preston?" Heather's brow furrowed. "Aren't they rather regional?" "They manage over $2 billion in assets," I said, hearing the defensive edge in my voice. "That's nice, dear," my mother interjected. "Heather, tell us more about your father's yacht. Will the rehearsal dinner be there?" I felt heat rising in my cheeks. "Mom, did you hear what I said? This promotion is a big deal. Jeffrey Preston personally." "Samantha," my father cut in, his tone carrying a warning. "Tonight is about Thomas and Heather. There's a time and place." "When exactly is that time, Dad?" The words escaped before I could stop them. "When is it ever my time?" The table fell silent. My father's expression hardened. "Perhaps you could try achieving something that doesn't pale in comparison," he said coldly. I stared at him stunned. "Pale in comparison? I've worked incredibly hard." "We all work hard," Thomas interrupted. "Some of us just work smarter." He smirked, raising his glass toward our father. Something snapped inside me, a lifetime of swallowed feelings surging to the surface. "You've never worked for anything in your life, Thomas. Everything has been handed to you while I've had to earn every single." "That's enough," my father's voice thundered. "I will not have you disparage your brother on his special day because of your jealousy." "Jealousy?" I laughed incredulously. "Is that what you think this is about?" "Samantha, please," my mother pleaded. "Let's not do this now." "When, Mom? When have you ever stood up for me? When have either of you ever been proud of me?" "This behavior is exactly why we've always had concerns about your maturity," my father said, his voice deadly quiet. "Thomas understands family loyalty. You only think of yourself." "Family loyalty?" I was trembling now. "I've spent my entire life trying to please you. Nothing has ever been enough." My father stood abruptly, his napkin falling to the floor. "If you can't celebrate your brother's happiness without making it about yourself, perhaps you should leave." I looked around the table. Aunt Patricia studied her plate. Uncle William examined his wineglass. Cousins Emily and Jason exchanged uncomfortable glances. Thomas put his arm around Heather protectively, as if I might lunge across the table. "Does anyone else see what's happening here?" I asked, my voice breaking. Silence. I stood on shaky legs. "Congratulations, Thomas and Heather. I hope you'll be very happy together." I turned to leave, dignity intact, when my father's voice stopped me cold. "Samantha," his tone made me turn back. "Until you can demonstrate proper family commitment and apologize for this display, consider yourself a stranger to this family." My mother gasped softly but said nothing. "Richard," Aunt Patricia murmured, "surely that's—" "I've made myself clear," my father interrupted. "Margaret, please show Samantha out." My mother rose mechanically, avoiding my eyes as she gestured toward the door. "It's best if you go now, Samantha." I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. The woman who had given birth to me, who had bandaged my skinned knees and checked my homework, was choosing once again to enable my father's conditional love. "Goodbye then," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I walked out of the dining room, through the hallway and out the front door. Nobody followed. Nobody called after me. The door closed with a definitive click behind me, and I stood in the gathering darkness, suddenly a stranger on the doorstep of the home where I'd grown up. The drive to Ember's apartment passed in a blur. Traffic lights, street signs, other cars all seemed to exist in another dimension as I navigated on autopilot, tears streaming down my face. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and I had to remind myself to breathe. "Consider yourself a stranger to this family." The words replayed in my mind, each repetition a fresh wound. How could he say that to me? How could my mother just stand there? How could no one speak up? I pulled into a parking space outside Amber's building, cut the engine and sat in silence. We'd been best friends since college orientation when we both arrived early and nervous, the only two students in the dorm lounge at 7 a.m., through breakups, job interviews, and the general chaos of our 20s. Amber had been my constant. She knew about my family, had witnessed their subtle dismissals during graduation and various visits, but even she didn't know the full extent of what I'd endured. The tears came harder now, my body shaking with sobs. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, letting years of suppressed pain pour out. A tap on the window startled me. Amber stood outside, concern etched on her face, holding a bag of groceries. She must have been returning home when she spotted my car. "Sam, what happened?" Minutes later, we sat on her couch, a box of tissues between us. Words tumbled out between sobs as I recounted the evening's events. Amber listened, her expression shifting from shock to outrage. "They're monsters," she declared when I finished. "Actual monsters." "They're my parents," I said automatically, the lifetime habit of making excuses for them kicking in. "No, Sam, parents don't do this. Parents don't pick favorites and disown their children for having feelings." I stared at my hands. Maybe I overreacted. I did interrupt Thomas's moment. "Stop it," Amber said firmly. "This isn't about one dinner. This is about a lifetime of them treating you like you don't matter." My phone chimed with a text. "Thomas, way to make my engagement about you. Classic Sam, Dad's furious." See, I showed Amber the message. I ruined everything. "You announced a promotion and asked for basic acknowledgement," Amber countered. "That's not ruining anything." More texts appeared, one from my mother. "Your father needs time to cool down. We'll discuss this when you're ready to apologize. And my father, your behavior tonight was inexcusable. When you're prepared to show proper respect, we can revisit your place in this family. Each message twisted the knife deeper. I turned off my phone. Amber made up her spare bedroom, lending me pajamas and a toothbrush. I lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling, replaying not just the dinner but countless other moments throughout my life. The time I won the state spelling bee in 8th grade, only to have my parents miss the ceremony for Thomas's baseball game. There will be other achievements, my mother had said. My high school graduation, where my valedictorian speech received polite applause from my parents while they cheered wildly for Thomas receiving a participation award in baseball. The Christmas when Thomas received a car for getting through midterms while I received a practical set of luggage. Each memory, previously rationalized away, now appeared in a new harsh light. The pattern was undeniable, the favoritism blatant. How had I not seen it so clearly before? The next morning I called in sick to work, something I'd never done, and spent the day in a daze on Amber's couch. I sent tentative texts to my mother and Aunt Patricia. My mother responded with more mentions of apologies and respect. Aunt Patricia didn't respond at all. By evening my cousin Emily sent a brief text, sorry about last night. Family group chat is intense. Give Uncle Richard some space. Family group chat? I asked Amber. There's a family group chat I'm not in? Amber winced. That's messed up. I tried calling my grandmother Eleanor, but only reached her voicemail. I left a message simply saying I loved her, not wanting to burden her with the drama. Days passed. I returned to work, functioning on autopilot. My boss, Jeffrey, noticed my distraction. Everything all right, Samantha? You seem off your game. Family issues, I said vaguely. I'll get it together. Take the time you need, he said kindly. Your work speaks for itself. Why couldn't my father see what my boss saw so clearly? A week after the dinner I tried once more to reach out, sending a carefully worded email to my parents. I didn't apologize for my feelings but expressed regret for the timing and asked if we could talk. My father's response was a single line, the ball is in your court. Samantha, we know what we need to hear from you. What they needed to hear was that I would continue to accept my place as the less important child, that I would smile and celebrate Thomas while minimizing my own achievements and needs, that I would maintain the family dynamic that had slowly been crushing me for 27 years. For the first time I wondered if I could or should give them what they wanted. May blurred into June as I moved through life in a fog. The promotion that should have been a crowning achievement became a hollow victory. I arrived at work early, left late, and spent weekends at my desk, not because of ambition but because going home to my empty apartment meant facing the silence of my phone, the absence of family. Samantha, these projections are off, Jeffrey said one afternoon, returning a report I'd prepared. This isn't like you. Is everything okay? Just a little distracted, I assured him. I'll fix them right away. My concentration was fractured, my mind constantly replaying the dinner, imagining alternate endings where I stayed silent, where I celebrated Thomas properly, where I didn't destroy my family with my selfishness. Amber tried to help, inviting me out, checking in daily, even suggesting therapy. I don't need therapy, I insisted. I need my family to love me. Maybe therapy could help you see that you deserve better than what they're giving you, she countered. I withdrew from other friends, canceling plans and ignoring texts. What was the point of connecting when the people who were supposed to love me most had discarded me so easily? Sleep became elusive. I'd lie awake replaying childhood memories, re-examining them through my new lens of awareness. The time my mother redecorated the house, transforming Thomas's bedroom into a sports-themed haven while giving my room a practical refresh with a desk suitable for studying. The graduation party where my father gave Thomas a Rolex to celebrate Samantha's achievement as a family. The countless dinners where my attempts at conversation were politely acknowledged before someone asked Thomas about his day. I lost weight as food lost its appeal. Dark circles appeared under my eyes. Even my normally immaculate appearance suffered. I couldn't muster the energy to care about pressed shirts or perfect hair when I felt so deeply unlovable. One Tuesday in late June I was preparing for a client meeting when a colleague stopped by my office, excited about her daughter's piano recital. She proudly displayed family photos on her phone, grandparents, aunts, uncles, all beaming at a little girl in a frilly dress. The whole family came to support her, she said happily. You should have seen how proud her grandpa was. Something inside me cracked. I excused myself and barely made it to the bathroom before the panic attack hit. My chest constricted, my breathing became shallow, and sweat beaded on my forehead as I locked myself in a stall. What was wrong with me? Why wasn't I enough? What fundamental flaw made me unworthy of the love and support this child received so easily? After the panic attack subsided, I splashed water on my face and called Jeffrey's assistant to reschedule my meetings. For the first time in my career, I walked out of the office in the middle of the day. At home, I crawled into bed fully dressed and finally allowed myself to break completely. Hours passed as I sobbed until no more tears would come. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me into restless sleep. I woke to pounding on my apartment door. Disoriented, I checked the time, 9 p.m. I'd slept for hours. The knocking continued. "Sam, it's Amber. Open up or I'm using my emergency key." I shuffled to the door, opening it to find Amber holding a bag of takeout, her expression shifting to shock when she saw me. "Jesus, Sam, you look terrible." "Thanks," I croaked. "You weren't answering your phone. I got worried." She followed me inside, taking in the uncharacteristic disarray of my apartment: dishes in the sink, clothes draped over chairs, mail piled unopened on the counter. "This isn't you," she said softly. "You need help, Sam." "I'm fine," I insisted weakly. Amber began tidying up while I picked at the food she'd brought. As she sorted through the mail, she paused at a lavender envelope. "This is from Maine," she said, handing it to me. "Isn't that where your grandmother lives?" I recognized Eleanor's handwriting immediately. The postmark was from weeks ago. My birthday had passed unnoticed in the midst of my emotional collapse. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a simple card with a watercolor painting of the Maine coastline. The message read, "Dearest Samantha, another year of watching you grow into the remarkable woman you are. Your kindness, intelligence, and perseverance make me prouder than you'll ever know. Remember that true worth isn't measured by others' recognition but by the integrity with which you live your life. Love is not conditional, my darling. It never should be. All my love. Grandma Eleanor." Something about the timing of the card, written before the family rupture but arriving at my lowest moment, felt like the universe offering a lifeline. I read it again, tears streaming down my face. "Call her," Amber urged gently. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and dialed my grandmother's number. She answered on the second ring. "Samantha, I was just thinking about you, darling." Her warm voice broke something open inside me. "Grandma," I sobbed, "everything's gone wrong." "Tell me," she said simply. I poured out everything: the dinner, my father's cruel words, my mother's complicity, the weeks of silence and pain. Eleanor listened quietly until I finished. "My sweet girl," she said finally, "I am so sorry they've hurt you this way." "What's wrong with me, Grandma? Why can't they love me like they love Thomas?" "Nothing is wrong with you," she said firmly. "Some people are incapable of loving without conditions. That's their failing, not yours." We talked for over an hour. As we prepared to hang up, Eleanor said, "Why don't you come stay with me for a while? The guest room is always ready for you, and the ocean has a way of putting things in perspective." The invitation felt like the first real breath I'd taken in weeks. "Are you sure?" "More than sure. I could use the company, and you could use a break from that world of yours." After hanging up, I turned to Amber. "I'm going to Maine." "Good," she said, relief evident in her voice. "You need to get away from here." The next day, I requested a 3-week leave of absence from work. To my surprise, Jeffrey approved it immediately. "You've banked enough overtime to take 3 months if you needed it," he said. "Get some rest, Samantha. We need you at your best." As I packed a suitcase, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't experienced since before the fateful dinner: hope. The drive to coastal Maine took nearly 4 hours, but with each mile I felt a weight lifting. Boston's urban landscape gave way to New Hampshire's rolling hills, then Maine's pine forests and glimpses of rocky coastline. The air seemed cleaner, the sky wider, the world somehow more forgiving. My grandmother's cottage sat on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, a weathered blue clapboard house with white trim and a wraparound porch. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, Eleanor appeared at the door, arms outstretched. At 78, she remained remarkably spry. Her silver hair cut in a stylish bob, her blue eyes so like my father's, yet so much warmer, bright with welcome. "There's my girl," she called as I stepped from the car. Her embrace enveloped me completely, warm, unreserved, and entirely unconditional. I melted into it, feeling like a child again. "You're too thin," she murmured, pulling back to examine me. "We'll fix that." The cottage smelled of cinnamon and sea air, its rooms filled with comfortable furniture, books, and paintings. Many of the paintings I knew were Eleanor's own work: landscapes and sea steps capturing the rugged Maine coast in all its moods. My grandfather had been an English professor at Bowdoin College, and after his death 10 years ago, Eleanor had thrown herself into painting, discovering a talent she'd never had time to nurture during her years as a faculty wife and mother. "I've made up the blue room for you," she said, leading me upstairs. "You always liked the view of the lighthouse." The blue room had been my favorite since childhood summer visits. Its windows faced east, catching the morning sun and offering a perfect view of the Portland headlight in the distance. The walls were the color of a robin's egg, the quilt on the bed a patchwork of blues and whites that Eleanor had made herself. "It's perfect," I said, dropping my suitcase by the door. "Thank you, Grandma." "Get settled, then come down for tea. You look like you could use a good cup and some homemade scones." Alone in the room, I unpacked slowly, hanging clothes in the cedar closet and arranging toiletries on the antique dresser. The familiar space welcomed me, unchanged from my childhood visits, yet somehow exactly what my adult self needed. Downstairs, Eleanor had set out tea and scones on the porch, where Adirondack chairs faced the ocean. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching waves crash against the rocks below. "Your father called," Eleanor said eventually. "He knows you're here." My stomach clenched. "What did he say?" "He expressed concern about you running away from your responsibilities." Her tone made clear what she thought of that assessment. "I told him you were taking necessary time for reflection, and that he might consider doing the same." I stared at her. "You said that to Dad?" A small smile played at her lips. "Richard forgets sometimes that I changed his diapers. He doesn't intimidate me. He intimidates everyone else," I said quietly. "Yes," she sighed. "He became very much like his father in that way, I'm afraid." "Great-grandfather Wilson?" I asked, surprised. "Dad always talks about him with such reverence." "I'm sure he does." Eleanor's gaze turned distant. "Harold Wilson was a formidable businessman and a terrible father. He believed in competition above all else, even between his children." "Like Dad with Thomas and me," I whispered. Eleanor nodded sadly. "Richard was the Thomas in his family, the favored son who could do no wrong. His older brother, your Uncle James, was brilliant and sensitive. Harold crushed that sensitivity out of him with constant criticism and comparison." "Uncle James?" I said, confused. "I don't have an Uncle James." "You wouldn't know him. He left the family after a falling out with Harold, moved to California, changed his name, built a new life." She sipped her tea. "Richard was 17 when it happened. He chose his father's approval over his brother's pain." The revelation stunned me. My father had a brother I'd never known existed, a brother who'd experienced the same rejection I was now facing. Why didn't anyone ever tell me this? "In this family, we don't discuss our failures," Eleanor said, perfectly mimicking my father's pompous tone. "Harold's greatest fear was weakness. He instilled that fear in Richard, who is now instilling it in Thomas." "And in me," I added. "He tried," Eleanor corrected. "But you're more like me, I think, more like James. You feel things deeply, you question, you seek genuine connection rather than approval." Over the next few days, our conversations continued. Eleanor shared family history I'd never known, how my grandfather had been her buffer against Harold's harshness, how she'd tried and failed to break the cycle of conditional love when raising my father. "I made many mistakes," she admitted one evening as we walked along the beach. "I thought love would be enough to counter Harold's influence. I didn't fight hard enough against the toxic patterns." "You're fighting now," I pointed out, "by supporting me." She squeezed my hand. "Better late than never, I suppose." One rainy afternoon, Eleanor showed me her studio, a converted sunroom filled with light even on the grayest day. Canvases in various stages of completion leaned against the walls, and the scent of oil paint and turpentine hung in the air. "I've been meaning to organize this space," she said, opening a large flat file drawer. "These are some of your early works." She pulled out childish drawings and paintings, a wobbly lighthouse, stick figures on a beach, a remarkably detailed seagull for a 10-year-old's hand. "You sent me these over the years," she explained, carefully handling each one. "I kept them all." "You did?" I was touched by the revelation. "Of course, you had a natural eye for composition even as a child." She studied the seagull drawing. "You stopped sending them when you were about 14. Why was that?" I thought back to my early teens. Dad said art was a hobby, not a pursuit. He suggested I focus on subjects that would lead to a real career. Eleanor's mouth tightened. "That sounds like Richard, and Harold before him." She pulled out a small canvas from another drawer, a sunset over water, painted with the uncertain hand of a young teenager. "This is yours," she said. "Your last summer here before college, remember?" I did remember. I'd spent hours getting the colors just right, trying to capture the way the fading light turned the ocean to molten gold. My grandfather had sat beside me, offering quiet encouragement. "I thought you might like to try again," Eleanor said, gesturing to an empty easel by the window. "No pressure, just for the joy of it." The invitation awakened something long dormant. That evening I stood before the easel, paintbrush in hand, watching the sunset over the same stretch of ocean I'd painted years ago. My strokes were hesitant at first, then more confident as muscle memory returned. The act of creation with no expectation of perfection, no external judgment felt like reuniting with a long-lost friend. I began painting daily after that, sometimes with Eleanor, sometimes alone. We walked the beaches collecting shells and sea glass, hiked coastal trails, and read books on the porch. In the evenings, we cooked together, simple meals that nonetheless tasted better than any restaurant fare. Slowly, my sleep improved. The dark circles under my eyes faded. I gained back some of the weight I'd lost. Most importantly, I began to think clearly about my life, not as my parents' daughter, not as Thomas's overlooked sister, but as Samantha, a person in my own right. 2 weeks into my stay, Eleanor brought out a photo album I'd never seen before. "These are pictures of James," she said, "your uncle." I pored over photos of a young man with my father's jawline but softer eyes. In the earliest images, he smiled openly. In later ones, the smile became increasingly strained, until in the final photos, it disappeared altogether. "He looks like me," I said, surprised. "You have his creative spirit too," Eleanor noted, "and his resilience, I hope." "What happened to him? Is he still alive?" "Yes, he's a professor of literature at Berkeley now. We exchange Christmas cards. He seems happy with the life he's built." "Does Dad ever ask about him?" Eleanor's silence was answer enough. "I don't want that to be my story," I said firmly. "I don't want to disappear from the family narrative just because I don't fit their mold." "What do you want, Samantha?" Eleanor asked gently. The question stopped me short. For so long, what I'd wanted was simple: my parents' approval, their love, their pride. But sitting there in that coastal cottage surrounded by art and acceptance, I realized I wanted something else entirely. "I want to live authentically," I said slowly. "I want to stop seeking validation from people who can't give it. I want to build a life that feels true to me, whether or not it meets someone else's expectations." Eleanor smiled, her eyes shining with unhid tears. "Then that's exactly what you should do." After 3 restorative weeks in Maine, I returned to Boston with both clarity and trepidation. My apartment felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, the space where I'd built my achievement-oriented life now viewed through new eyes. The first thing I did was rearrange the furniture, moving my desk away from its central position and creating a cozy reading nook by the window instead. I unpacked the small watercolor I'd completed under Eleanor's guidance, a rendering of her cottage at dawn, and hung it in a place of honor. My first day back at work, I requested a meeting with Jeffrey. "Welcome back," he said warmly as I entered his office. "You look rested." "I am," I confirmed, "and I've been doing some thinking about my future here." Jeffrey leaned forward, concern flashing across his face. "You're not resigning, I hope? The Hamilton account specifically asked for you." "No, not resigning," I assured him, "but I've realized something about myself. I'm good at finance, the analysis, the strategy, but it's not what ignites my passion." "Go on," he encouraged. "Preston has that new creative department developing marketing materials and client presentations. I'm interested in exploring whether my skills might be valuable there, perhaps in a liaison role between finance and creative." Jeffrey studied me thoughtfully. "That's quite a pivot." "It is," I acknowledged, "but I think it could benefit the firm. Who better to translate complex financial concepts into compelling visuals than someone who deeply understands both worlds?" To my surprise, Jeffrey nodded slowly. "We've been looking to strengthen that connection. The creatives don't always grasp the nuances of what they're illustrating, and our advisors aren't always clear about what they need visualized." He tapped his pen against his desk. "I can arrange a conversation with Lydia and creative, start with a project-by-project collaboration and see where it leads." "Thank you," I said, relief washing over me. "I appreciate your openness to this." "Samantha," he said as I stood to leave, "may I speak frankly?" I nodded. "You've always been one of our most meticulous, dedicated advisors, but in the 3 days you've been back, I've noticed something different. You seem lighter somehow. It suits you." The observation touched me deeply. "I'm working on finding balance," I said simply. That weekend, Amber helped me search for a new apartment. My current place had been chosen for its proximity to the financial district and its understated elegance, both qualities my father would approve of. Now I wanted something that reflected my emerging authentic self. We found a slightly smaller but much brighter apartment in Cambridge, with bay windows, built-in bookshelves, and most importantly a spare room that could serve as a studio. The neighborhood had character, with independent bookstores, coffee shops, and an art supply store within walking distance. "This is so you," Amber declared as we explored the space, "the you that's always been there under all that corporate polish." I signed the lease that day. The process of packing my old apartment became unexpectedly cathartic. I sorted through possessions accumulated over years, separating items chosen to project success from those that genuinely brought me joy. The sleek, impersonal art pieces purchased to impress visitors went into a donation pile. The comfortable but unfashionable reading chair I'd always loved was designated for the new place. Most revealing was sorting through photographs. So many featured my family in formal poses, everyone smiling stiffly in coordinated outfits. I packed these away in a box rather than displaying them in my new home. Instead, I framed candid shots with Ember and other friends. A beautiful photo of the Maine coastline, and a picture of Eleanor painting at her easel. By mid-July, I was settled in Cambridge and establishing a new routine. Mornings began with coffee and sketching by the bay window before work. Evenings included exploration of my new neighborhood or art classes at the community center. Weekends offered time for more serious painting projects in my makeshift studio. At work, my collaboration with the creative department blossomed. My first project, reimaging retirement planning materials to better engage emotional as well as logical decision-making, received enthusiastic responses from both colleagues and clients. "You found your niche, Lydia," the creative director told me after a particularly successful presentation. "You speak both languages fluently." As my external world transformed, so did my internal landscape. Regular sessions with Dr. Bennett, a therapist recommended by Ember, helped me process the family dynamics that had shaped me and develop healthier boundaries. Family estrangement is particularly painful, Dr. Bennett explained during one session, because it contradicts our fundamental expectation that family equals unconditional love. "My grandmother offers that," I noted. "Why can't my parents?" "Some people can only give what they've received," she said gently. "Your father's modeling came from his own conditional upbringing. That doesn't excuse his behavior, but it might help explain it." Through therapy, I began to see my parents not as the infallible authorities of my childhood, but as flawed individuals perpetuating patterns they themselves had suffered. August brought my first major holiday away from family. Traditionally, we gathered at my parents' summer home on Cape Cod for a Labor Day cookout. Instead, I hosted a small gathering on my new apartment's rooftop deck. Amber came with her boyfriend Michael, along with new friends from my art class and colleagues from Preston's creative department. As twilight fell and string lights twinkled overhead, conversations flowed easily among these people from different corners of my life. Looking around at these relationships chosen rather than inherited, based on genuine connection rather than obligation, I realized I was creating my own definition of family. The most unexpected development came in late September when my cousin Emily texted me out of the blue, "Can we meet for coffee? No one knows I'm contacting you." We arranged to meet at a cafe halfway between Boston and her suburban home. Emily arrived looking nervously over her shoulder, as if expecting to be caught in an illicit act. "How are you?" she asked as we settled at a corner table. "You look different, different." "I am different," I acknowledged. "How's everyone?" Emily's expression clouded. "That's partly why I wanted to see you. The family narrative about what happened is pretty one-sided. Uncle Richard tells everyone you had some kind of breakdown because you couldn't handle Thomas's success." I wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still stung. "And everyone believes that?" "Mom and Dad pretend to," Emily said, fidgeting with her napkin. "But last week at dinner, Dad questioned why no one had reached out to you, and Uncle Richard shut him down hard. It was uncomfortable." She hesitated, then added, "Thomas and Heather are getting married at Christmas. Aunt Margaret seems stressed about it. I overheard her telling Mom she wishes you could be there, but Uncle Richard forbids anyone from mentioning your name." The information settled like a stone in my stomach. Despite my progress, part of me had hoped my parents might reach out, might recognize the pain they'd caused. "Why are you telling me this, Emily?" She met my eyes directly. "Because it's wrong what they're doing to you, and because seeing Uncle Richard blacklist you so completely made me realize how conditional his love is. It could be any of us next." We talked for nearly 2 hours. Emily shared family updates while I described my new life. As we prepared to leave, she hugged me tightly. "I'd like to stay in touch," she said, "if that's okay with you." "I'd like that too," I replied, feeling a small bridge forming across the family chasm. Walking home from that meeting, I realized I had reached a turning point. I could continue hoping for parental validation that might never come, or I could fully embrace the life I was building on my own terms. For the first time, the choice seemed clear. That evening, I changed my home address with the post office, updated my emergency contacts to remove my parents, and sent a small watercolor of the Maine coast to my grandmother with a note of gratitude, small acts of independence but significant ones. I was no longer waiting for permission to live my life. 6 months after the family dinner that changed everything, I barely recognized my former self. My role at Preston had evolved into a formal position bridging the finance and creative departments, with my own small team developing visually compelling ways to explain complex financial concepts. My apartment had become a true home, filled with books, art, and objects that told my story rather than projecting an image. Most significantly, I had stopped checking my phone for messages from my parents. The hope of reconciliation hadn't disappeared entirely, but it no longer dominated my thoughts or defined my worth. I maintained regular contact with Grandma Eleanor, visiting Maine monthly. Emily and I met for coffee every few weeks, our relationship deepening beyond the superficial family connection we'd shared before. Even my cousin Jason had reached out, initially to borrow my professional expertise for a project, then continuing our communication with genuine interest in my new path. The confrontation I'd both feared and secretly anticipated came unexpectedly on a crisp October evening. I was attending a charity gala representing Preston Financial, a task that once would have terrified me but now felt manageable. I was chatting with a client when I spotted them across the room, my parents, perfectly coiffed and dressed, working the crowd with practiced charm. My pulse quickened. I hadn't seen them since that fateful night in April. Part of me wanted to slip away unnoticed, but a stronger part recognized this moment as inevitable. Better to face it on neutral ground than be blindsided later. I excused myself from the conversation and took a steadying breath. As I approached, my mother saw me first. Her eyes widened, her smile faltering momentarily before resuming its social fixed tenses. "Richard," she murmured, touching my father's arm. He turned, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition to carefully controlled neutrality. "Samantha," he said, his voice formal. I wasn't aware Preston was involved with this event. "We're a major sponsor," I replied, maintaining composure. "I'm representing our creative finance initiative." Creative finance? My father's tone suggested an oxymoron. "It's a new division bridging investment strategy and visual communication." I led the team. An awkward silence fell. My mother filled it with nervous chatter. "You look well, Samantha. Have you lost weight? Your hair is different." "I'm the same weight as always, Mom. The hair is new. I'd recently added subtle auburn highlights to my naturally dark hair, a small change that somehow represented larger transformations." Another silence. Around us the gala continued, attendees oblivious to our tense reunion. "Thomas and Heather's wedding plans are coming along nicely," my mother offered. "December 23rd at the Plaza Hotel." Her family connections secured it despite the waiting list. The implied boast was so typical I almost smiled. "That sounds lovely. Please give them my congratulations." My father cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should find somewhere quieter to talk." We moved to a less crowded corner of the venue. I noticed my father scanning the room as we walked, undoubtedly concerned about appearances. "We expected to hear from you," he began once we were relatively private. "Your mother has been concerned." I looked at my mother, who studied her champagne flute rather than meeting my eyes. "I've been busy building a life," I said simply, "one that makes me happy." "Your impulsive career change concerns me," my father continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Preston has a sterling reputation in wealth management. This creative direction sounds unstable." 6 months ago his disapproval would have devastated me. Now I recognized it for what it was: fear of anything that didn't fit his narrow definition of success. "It's working well for me," I said. "Jeffrey is pleased with the results, and so are our clients." "Nevertheless," he pressed, "I think it's time you put this rebellion behind you. Thomas and Heather's wedding is approaching, and your absence would be noted. Not we miss you or we want you there. Your absence would be noted. The family image would be tarnished." "Is that an invitation?" I asked. My father shifted uncomfortably. "Naturally, we expect family to attend." "Do you?" I looked directly at him. "The last time we spoke, you told me to consider myself a stranger to the family." "You were emotional," he dismissed. "We all said things in the heat of the moment." "I was hurt," I corrected, "and you were cruel, not just that night, but for years." My mother finally spoke. "Samantha, please, this isn't the place." "It never is the place, Mom. That's the problem. There's never a right time or place to acknowledge the truth in our family." My father's jaw tightened. "If you're waiting for some dramatic apology, you'll be disappointed. Families have disagreements. Adults move past them." "Moving past requires acknowledgement," I said, not pretending nothing happened. He sighed with practiced patience. "What exactly do you want, Samantha?" The question echoed Eleanor's from months before, but with none of the genuine curiosity. Still, I answered honestly. I want you to see me, really see me, not as an extension of your expectations or in comparison to Thomas, but as a person in my own right. I want you to be interested in my happiness, not just my achievements or how they reflect on you." My father looked genuinely baffled, my mother's eyes filled with tears. "We've always wanted what's best for you," she said softly. "What you thought was best," I corrected gently, "not what actually made me happy or fulfilled." My father checked his watch, a dismissal I'd seen countless times before. "We should rejoin our table. This conversation is becoming circular." In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity what I'd been gradually accepting for months. My parents were incapable of giving me what I needed, not because they didn't love me in their way, but because their definition of love was fundamentally conditional, performance-based and image-conscious. "I won't be attending the wedding," I said calmly. "Please tell Thomas I wish him and Heather every happiness, but I won't pretend we're a loving family when we're not." "That's your final word?" My father's tone was cold. "For now," I replied. "My door remains open if you ever want to have a real relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than compliance, but I won't sacrifice my self-worth for your approval anymore." I turned to my mother, whose expression wavered between distress and resignation. "I love you, Mom. That hasn't changed. But I've changed, and I can't go back to who I was." Without waiting for a response, I walked away. My hands trembled slightly, but my steps were steady. I didn't look back to see their reactions. For once, their approval or disapproval wasn't the measure of my worth. The wedding came and went without me. Emily reported that my absence was explained as an unavoidable work commitment, maintaining the family facade. I sent a thoughtful gift with a sincere card, drawing boundaries without burning bridges entirely. As April approached, marking 1 year since the fateful dinner, I decided to host a different kind of celebration. I invited friends, colleagues, and my small circle of supportive family to a gallery showing of my paintings, mostly landscapes inspired by Maine, but also abstract pieces exploring themes of identity and belonging. The tiny gallery belonged to my art teacher, who had encouraged me to display my work publicly. "Art exists to be seen," she's insisted, "just like people exist to be truly known." On opening night, I stood nervously greeting guests, accepting congratulations, and explaining my inspirations. Amber arrived with flowers. Eleanor had traveled from Maine despite the long journey. Emily and Jason came together, exclaiming over a painting of the Boston skyline at dawn. "You captured the light perfectly," Jason marveled. "I never knew you were an artist." "Neither did I for a long time," I admitted. As the evening wound down, I found myself alone before the centerpiece of the exhibition, a large canvas depicting a dining table with empty chairs, a single place setting illuminated while others faded into shadow. "It's powerful," said a voice behind me, loneliness and strength in the same image. I turned to find Jeffrey, my boss, studying the painting. "Thank you for coming," I said, genuinely touched, "and for supporting my journey this past year." "You've brought something valuable to Preston," he replied. "Authenticity, it's rarer than you might think in our industry." Later that night, after all the guests had departed, I returned to my apartment with Eleanor, who was staying the weekend. We sat on my balcony, wrapped in blankets against the spring chill, sharing tea in silence. "I'm proud of you," she said finally, "not just for the art, though that's remarkable. I'm proud of how you've rebuilt your life on your terms." "I learned from the best," I smiled, squeezing her hand. "Do you still miss them?" she asked softly. "Your parents?" I considered the question carefully. "I miss who I wish they could be," I answered truthfully. "I miss the idea of having parents who could love me unconditionally, but the actual relationship we had, no, I don't miss that anymore." Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Some family trees need pruning to stay healthy. It's painful but necessary." The strange thing is, I reflected, being considered a stranger to my family of origin forced me to find my true family, the people who love me for exactly who I am, not for what I achieve or how I make them look. "And that's the greatest achievement of all," Eleanor said, raising her teacup in a toast, "finding your authentic self and the courage to live accordingly." We clinked cups, watching the city lights twinkle below as a new day approached. 1 year after the most painful rejection of my life, I had discovered the most important acceptance, my own, and that, I finally understood, was enough. Have you ever had to walk away from a relationship that was hurting you more than helping you? Do you think family members should be forgiven simply because they're family, or do you believe in setting boundaries even with parents? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this story resonated with you. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my journey. and I hope it helps anyone facing similar struggles know they're not alone.